Good evening, guys. This is our first online PowerPoint that I've made for you guys into a video, and it's going to start looking at the body structure and function. We're going to go across look at some training tonight. We're going to look at function of the heart, and we're going to look at some of the components of the heart as well. So firstly, we're going to look at principles of training. Now, principles of training refers to the number of times, frequency. The first element of principles of training refers to the number of times per week you train. Now, depending on what sort of an athlete you are, especially if you're an aerobic athlete, you might have a very high volume of training, especially things like rowers, bikers, runners, and that's what we're going to look at, those kind of athletes for our anaerobic and aerobic elements to this. Intensity refers to how hard you train, so this can be measured in different ways, i.e. heart rate, number of reps and sets. How we're going to measure it is through the heart rate, and that's why I got you to download the heart rate app when we were for tomorrow's class. So you can do a pre-heart rate to see what your baseline heart rate is, and then we will look at once you've finished the cross-country course, what your final heart rate is and what sort of training zone you were training in. Remember back to the first term, we looked at it as a percentage of heart rate max, depending on whether it was aerobic, anaerobic, and creatine phosphagen system. Remembering that the 65% to 85% is the aerobic system, 85 to 95 is anaerobic, and for that really explosive stuff using the creatine phosphagen, we said that was about 95 to 100. Duration refers to how long a training session or program is. Predominantly, we will be training between 45 and 60 minutes for our aerobic. Some of the strength stuff that we might do will be different. And then the last principle of training is rest. So it's really important to manage your rest in terms of what you're trying to train for. If you're trying to train very highly anaerobic, you might have longer rest periods, but if you're training aerobic, you might have shorter rest periods. Progressive overload, for any athlete to develop strength, etc., workloads have to be demanding on the body. The body will adapt if the workloads are regular and a level above these normally encountered. So basically what that's saying is to really progress and progress at a good rate, get stronger and get a better aerobic or anaerobic capacity, we have to push our bodies quite hard, because when we're thinking about our muscles grow or get stronger, or our heart gets stronger when we put it under pressure of high level intensity in terms of training. Specificity, training exercises should replicate the movements and energy system that characterizes that sport. Rowers could train using the erg. So that doesn't always have to be the case. You can cross-train, but in terms of specificity for your sport, if a swimmer was always biking all the time, or vice versa, if a biker was always swimming all the time, it's probably not training the muscle groups or specifically getting the athlete conditioned for their chosen event, mainly because they'll be using different muscles and they might have slightly different energy systems that they're targeting. Excuse me. So how do we measure heart rate? If you remember, today we used that heart rate monitor, which some of you weren't so happy with. What we could do is we could get a pulse, which we call our radial pulse, on our wrist, and we count the beats for 30 seconds and double it. That can get us a rough idea of where our heart rate is. The only issue is that's a perfectly fine way to do that when you're at resting heart rate, but when you're out and you've done a very hard train, it's really hard if your heart's up to 170, 180 beats a minute to count all the beats in that short 30-second spot and then doubling it. So it's really important that you've got something like a heart rate monitor to back that up in terms of validity and accuracy. Age predicted heart rate max. So when we think of our heart rate max and link it to our VO2 max, which is 220 minus our age. So for you guys who are 14 to 15 years old, it's either going to be about 206 beats per minute or 205. And that what we need to take into consideration with this is that some athletes, sorry, I'll rephrase that. Percentage heart rate max. Remember, if we're looking at the percentage of their heart rate max, we are looking at, say, 70 to 85% or 65 to 85% if we're looking at the aerobic capacity. It's a percentage of that 206 or 205 at 75 or 85, or if we're looking at anaerobic, it could be what's 90 to 95% of 206. That's how we can work out what percentage training zone we're working in by using that calculation. So what we're going to look at for a bit is understanding the heart. The heart is a muscle which is responsible for moving blood around the body, especially, well, pumps it through the blood vessels. Heart rate is a number of times the heart contracts per minute. So every beat that the heart pumps for, it is pumping a volume of oxygenated blood out to our surrounding areas, pumping it to muscles to take oxygen to them when they're exercising. The harder we training will mean that the heart will pump faster. The fitter we get, I'll talk about that in a minute, but the fitter we get, generally the larger amount of blood we can pump per beat. That is why we have the fitter we are, we generally have a lower resting heart rate. And then at a higher intensity, our heart rate is still lower than someone who is not as fit. So these are the four chambers of the heart. What the heart is responsible for is pumping out the oxygenated blood to all parts of our body, the muscles and the vital organs, and it's also the veins are bringing the blood back to pump out the deoxygenated blood containing the carbon dioxide, and that's why we breathe in the oxygen, we breathe out the carbon dioxide. I won't go too much into the four chambers of the heart, but as we can see here, we've got the left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, and right ventricle. And I'll discuss that more in class, what's happening there. And this YouTube video here is basically linked, sorry, I'll just go back, is basically linked to the task that I've got you to do with Edpuzzle. So we won't watch this video now. I won't discuss this video now. That's part of your homework to watch that video and answer the questions. So just go over some key terms. This is basically just to develop knowledge. You probably won't need to know too much about this for your test. You just need to be able to understand and put it into a practical setting. So for a start, there's the stroke volume. So it's the volume of blood pumped out of the left ventricle into the aorta with each heartbeat, measured in litres per beat. So that's when the aorta contracts and it sends the blood out to the outlying areas of the body, the muscles and the vital organs. Respiration rate, so number of times you breathe per minute, measured in breaths per minute, and obviously as we increase in exercise, the breathing rate goes up because we need to remove the carbon dioxide from our muscles, and we need to pump in the oxygenated rich blood. So when we look at immediate responses to exercise, so this is when we immediately start training. The heart rate increases to pump more blood around to the working muscles, obviously, because the blood needs oxygenated. The muscles need oxygenated blood. Stroke volume, heart contractions are stronger. The heart is able to move more blood into your body, so the stroke volume will increase, which is quite obvious. And the respiration breathing rate, the number of breaths you take in per minute, will increase as you try to get more oxygen into your body. So you're breathing lots, you're working really hard, your muscles are working really hard, so they require more oxygen. So obviously the breathing respiration rate will go up. Long-term response to exercise. So this is after a long period of training. So as you get fitter, as the heart develops an increased capacity to perform, because remember that heart's like a muscle, so the bigger that muscle gets, the stronger it is, and the more blood it can pump out per beat. At high levels, the resting heart rate will drop. Remembering what I just said, the size of the heart is a muscle, so it will respond like any other muscle and grow in size to allow increased performance with less effort. So that's that whole thing of a huge volume of blood being pumped out per beat because it's stronger and not requiring the same amount of output for the same amount of exercise. Stroke volume after a sustained period while training will increase, and that why the stroke volume increases is because it can pump a larger amount of blood to those working muscles and organs. Cool. Well, that'll do us for tonight. We'll go over energy systems later in the week. So you've got a energy system. You've got a Quizlet to do, which is a max activity, which will help you understand the key terms of the heart and these immediate and long-term responses to exercise. And also, there's the Ed puzzle on how the heart works. Thank you, boys, and we'll see you in the morning.